What's up, everyone? This is another Conflicts of Interest bonus episode. Today I'm joined by my good friends, Connor Freeman. He's a writer at the Libertarian Institute. And, of course, Joanne Leone, the host of Around the Empire. Connor, how you doing?
I'm great. Great to be here. What's up,
Joanne,
Intip?
how you
How you
doing
doing today?
tonight?
Good, Kyle. How you doing, Connor? How you doing, Kyle?
Doing great.
Great. So, we got some general, I think, Afghan stuff to talk about, just a little narratives and things going on that I think are being, misreported or just weird spins to them and everything like that. And so I wanted to get into a few different issues. I think we each have one. As the bonus shows have been, keep it a little bit on the lighter side, not like as news heavy or anything like that. And we'll just get rolling with it. Everybody, just be sure to check out Joanne's content around the Empire, or subscribe on YouTube, or the bonus stuff. And there is a lot of really good stuff. Joanne has always sent me her bonus clips, and trust me, there's a lot of great stuff in there. So subscribe to her on Rockfin. And then, of course, find this show at the Libertarian Institute, which is, of course, where you find anything that Connor writes. And if you need any CBD products, you get it at Paloma Verde, and use the promo code PEACE to support the show. All right, guys, let's get into this. And Connor, what did you have to talk about in Afghanistan?
Well, to start, I wanted to talk about essentially one of the things I've noticed picking up like analysis about media coverage on the whole withdrawal and the end of the war in Afghanistan. I thought it was really interesting. Phil Weiss at Mondo Weiss and Ali Abduma at Electronic Intifada have been writing some really great stuff about how essentially, basically how the neoconservatives and the Israel lobby are attempting. The way I would phrase it is they're trying to preempt Afghanistan syndrome, or to at least if possible, I mean, at least preempt Afghanistan syndrome, and if possible, exploit the situation to enhance the Israeli position in the region, in the Middle East, and what we saw, because we covered on our last show, Kyle and I talking about the recent meeting with Joe Biden and Naftali Bennett, the new Prime Minister of Israel, and we saw how, well, you were getting reports at the time about how essentially that they were part of the strategy on the Israelis' part was to try and use the political costs of the withdrawal on the Biden administration to get essentially to, I mean, the way it's phrased in some of these quotes, which I'll be reading here in a moment, they wanted to be able to get the Americans, basically get the Americans out of a position of weakness to try and make up for that by, flexing their muscles against Iran. And, it's interesting because I think one of the things that they talk, we saw that Bennett said to Biden, he encourages him not to return to the Iran deal, and as well to stay presumably indefinitely in Iraq and Syria. And there's no doubt in my mind, as we discussed, that that was probably the direction the Americans were going to go anyway. But it's still notable that the Israelis are taking this route and trying to make sure that this is not the beginning of this is not the first domino in a series of decisions and actions that lead to a much more diminished American role in the Middle East and in the way we've become accustomed to, unfortunately, in the era of the terror war. That really, the whole backdrop of it is 9/11 and the war in Afghanistan. So I'll go through basically to start how I think we'll finish off with Bill Kristol talking about how the experts have the right to basically tell the people what, it doesn't matter if you don't want war, we do, and that's what matters, that's what counts, so you better go along begrudgingly. But so he says, let's see. So we'll start with Mark Dubowitz of the Foundation for Defensive Democracy, which is an infamous anti-Iran think tank, and a very powerful one at that. And so let's see. So Dubowitz says Biden's chaotic Afghan withdrawal has shocked and angered U.S. allies. He says So much for a president who would consult closely with our allies and build alliances to deter our common enemies. The Taliban's victory may allow the clerical regime in Iran to build on the influence it has worked decades to build in the country. These two Islamist regimes have a common interest in fueling extremism and undermining the U.S. and its allies. And Phil Weiss says the reference to friends and allies betrays the true neoconservative concern for Israel and its military supremacy. Dubowitz is seeking to use the Afghan debacle to derail a return to the Iran deal. And here's another quote. American credibility and leverage is badly eroded. Israel must help its friend restore both. Dubowitz cites a recent Newsweek piece he co-authored warning the U.S. Israel will use force even if the U.S. is tired of using it. He says if there's no other option to prevent Iran from getting nuclear weapons, the Jewish state will go it alone, echoing some of the other rhetoric we've heard from Israeli officials recently. And then I was going to get into how Elliot Abrams is saying how this should be to the advantage of Israel as well. So he says, let's see. So Elliot Abrams says, what's happening in Afghanistan will deepen the impression among Arab governments that they cannot rely on the United States to protect their security as they used to. So those states have increasingly drawn the conclusion that they have one neighbor who, unlike Iran or Turkey, poses no threat to them and who continually displays a firm willingness to use military power against its enemies. That's Israel. Israel, in addition, has a modern economy based on exceptional high-tech achievements and maintains not only a close alliance with the United States, but working relationships with Russia and China. For the Arabs, then, the Abraham's Accords were at long last the victory of self-interest over ideology and over outmoded versions of Arab nationalism and support for Palestinians. Well, what's interesting about this, of course, is it leads more to these discussions of forming sort of a anti-Iran NATO style coalition in the Middle East based off of the Abraham Accords against Iran. So it's interesting to see because as well, you have other neocons who are saying things like Russia and China are going to be capitalizing on this and, you know, painting us as weak and like we're unaccountable to our allies and unreliable. And so I see as much as anything else, the political costs of the withdrawal are being used to hype up other threats and to push the U.S. to be, especially Biden's administration, to make up for it somewhere else.
Right. I actually just saw a post from Ben Shapiro that hit about every single one of those things that you just said. But it is interesting that you see Israel seeking to almost do kind of what Saudi Arabia did when the Iran nuclear deal was signed, where they're worried about if you lose even one enemy in the Middle East and one war in the Middle East, that this is some kind of signal that the U.S. policy is really shifting and you're going to lose your place in the world, so you have to do something desperate and maybe dangerous to make sure that the U.S. can't disengage, like we see with the war in Yemen. And I'm not sure exactly what Israel would do because it doesn't seem like they really want a war with Iran. But at the same time, I was reading Dave DeCamp this morning at antiwar.com, writing that the Israeli, not the defense minister, but defense official, was saying they're accelerating their attack plans against Iran. So I don't know exactly what that means, but I'm guessing it has to do with, some asymmetrical stuff in Iran, assassinating someone, blowing up some nuclear facility or something like that. And also probably a crackdown on the Palestinians and increased bombing in Syria as well, if not straight up interference with maybe some Iranian ships. Joanne, anything about these neocons?
No, I'm just gonna listen on this one. They make me nervous. That's all I have to say.
Well, yeah, well, they should. They says, let's see, Condoleezza Rice. This is one that stuck out at me right at the beginning. Daniel Larison wrote a piece called "This Is What We Mean When We Talk About the Blob," and first of all, he quotes another guy from the FDD, Brad Bowman, who says, "China and Russian diplomats." Let's see. He's eager to claim that this is a quote, Chinese and Russian diplomats to ramp up with new credibility whisper campaign in capitals around the world that Washington is an unreliable partner who will abandon its friends sooner or later. And then he says, Condoleezza Rice has asserted credibility is not divisible, and China, Russia, and Iran have taken our measure. The pictures of the last few days will emblazon an image of America in retreat. Now is the time to reinforce our commitments to Ukraine, Iraq, and particularly Taiwan. So I mean, it's just it's funny because it's not funny. It's very like dark, honestly. But like Biden has to justify and cover his right flank by going, I'm still going to bomb Afghanistan. I'm still going to bomb Afghanistan. I'm going to bomb Somalia more. I'm going to bomb Syria more. We're still threatened. I'll be bombing Yemen. And I'm really focusing now on China and Russia. So the internal, the behind the scenes dynamic must be fascinating, or very tense, because and I don't know where we're going either with Afghanistan as far as are they going to continue to withhold all these billions of dollars in reserves? I mean, are we going to keep the Taliban as an enemy? I was tuning into Fox News today, just to sort of, I sometimes do that to sap any confidence I have in the American public. I'll just watch it and I'll just be like, no, things aren't getting better.
No, you have to do MSNBC for that one.
Oh, okay, yeah. Because I grew up with the Fox, I got to check out them both. But Fox, they're talking today and they're going, can you believe these people in the government? They were in Gitmo. These are the worst people in the world. And you're like, really? We can use this as a talking point now, that these people are so bad, we had them at Gitmo. That is not a national disgrace and something that is still not be the scandal is not that we haven't closed Gitmo. The scandal is that there are people who are no longer in Gitmo, who are taking positions in a government in a country we bombed 80,000 times. So, it's just incredible. And then they brought on, they were scaremongering about the new Taliban government, and they were saying how these people are the worst of the worst. And look, this guy's a part of the Haqqani network. I think his name is not Jalaluddin, Shuhadaddin is the son's name, I think. And he's the new interior minister. And they were fear-mongering about all of this. And they said they brought on 9/11's the sisters of men who died on 9/11 to say that Biden's withdrawal from Afghanistan feels like a stab in the back.
This is one thing worth mentioning here, and something that is one of the most evil things that the mainstream media loves to do, is they put up victims of whatever, and then they say whatever this victim advocates, you have to support, or you're, disgracing that, the victim and their family and everything like that. And it's like, no, I understand that, these people are mad and feel that way. And, I have no interest in arguing with the, particular victims' families, that they want to be angry and upset about this. Then, I get they, lost somebody they care about. But we can't make our national policy based off the most pissed off person. That's absolutely the most insane idea ever. And that's openly what's often pushed as how we should carry out all of our policy.
Yeah, not to be harsh about it, but one of my first thoughts was it's been 20 years since 9/11. Your brother died in 9/11, and you haven't bothered to look further into it than to blame the Taliban for 9/11.
I mean, that's also an issue, but at the same time, I think a lot of the briefings that these people get really, they often will bring them in and give them a secret briefing on the mission or what happened and stuff like that, and feed them lies, and then their propaganda, to go out there. I think this is essentially what happened to the Tillman family, right? Where they were told that, he died in some mission and it was really friendly fire. But I think for a while, they were out there promoting the Pentagon's narrative on it. So it's just, part of the propaganda narrative we have to fight.
Yeah, I mean, I live out here in Arizona, and you see every once in a while someone wearing a shirt that says Pats Run, and it's just okay, so we're just gonna pretend that it's this is something we should remember him, but exclude all of what you just said, and just think of him as a victim in a noble fight against terrorism.
Right, or the problem with Guantanamo Bay is somebody once got out of that place, and not gonna look at any of the torturing that was going on there. But what'd you have, Joanne?
No, I mean the whole thing with the families and the insult or some perceived harm because the Taliban are back in power. I don't know. It just makes me wonder. First of all, getting Osama bin Laden was the guy to get for to mark the end of the revenge or something. What wasn't it? But I think it's this whole thing has been so twisted for so many years to justify going to this country or going to that country, or like why didn't we leave Afghanistan after the first couple of months, if we took out the terror threat, supposed terror threat, terror camps and things like that. If we had done that, then I think some of these 20 years later things probably wouldn't be happening right now. But also, it's just, I guess, in a recent interview with Ray McGovern, like he tends to bring it all back to like, hey, wait a minute, guys. Remember like where these things were planned, these other countries, and it just bothers me when things get so simplified down to the Taliban. And I'm no fan of the Taliban. I am much less generous than most of my friends are with the Taliban. I do think that they are monstrous creatures, and I would run the other way if I was anywhere near them. But still, there's a lot more to it, and it just upsets me when people exploit things like that. Just like it upset me when the former ambassador to Ryan, what is his name? Ryan Crocker or whatever. He did this op-ed, and at the very end of it, he exploited the people who were forced to jump from the towers on that day. And I thought, you son of a, he compared it to, of course, the Afghan people who, the plane during the evacuation. And I just thought, I'm just so tired of this. I'm just really, really tired of people exploiting other people's pain, suffering, for more wars, which is, not news to you. Just little gripe.
But I feel like I felt some of that same anger in the past couple days where, it's really been the past month, but particularly the past couple days, everybody's, like suddenly interested a little bit in foreign policy again and remembering 9/11. For all these people who haven't cared about any of it for 20 years, essentially, maybe once a year they'll do a moment of silence and that's it. And now suddenly, not only do they care, but they're an expert on everything, and they're going to tell you like how we need to prevent another 9/11 and all this. But Joanne, what did you have for today?
Well, as usual, there's so much that I always have a hard time to choosing which one. Do you have any preference on the three things that I had, Kyle?
Whatever
any
you want.
Preference of those three? Because I could talk about the New Yorker article,
which was fantastic, and everybody, I recommend checking it out. Anand Gopal, the other Afghan woman. It's a long read, but it's definitely insightful on, how things have unfolded in rural Afghanistan over the past 30 years.
Yeah, and because it's such a long piece, and it's very stylized, it's written more like a novel, I would say. Which frankly I don't always appreciate on this topic, because I'm immediately wary that it's just really strong propaganda. But in this case, it was just really moving and descriptive, and so for that reason, I don't want to like give a synopsis really or summarize. But basically, he was able to, over the summer, in Helmand province, he was able to make contact with a lot of women in Afghanistan, in rural Afghanistan. And when he says the other Afghan women, he's pointing out that 70% of the population are in rural areas. They're not in Kandahar, in Kabul, in some of the cities in the north. They're not in the urban areas. And the gripe is, to bring it into the topic that we're talking about today, it's what about the women? What about the women? What about the women? And some people pretend, some people genuinely are upset about the way this war in Afghanistan ended up, because it left so many women in a lurch and in a precarious situation, and progress that was made, gone. or at least it certainly looks like it is. And but they paint a picture as if we were the great hope for women in Afghanistan. And he makes a lot of good points, but one of them that he makes is those people, those 70% of the women in the rural areas really did not benefit from women's rights being advanced in Afghanistan due to the Western presence and influence there. They really didn't. In fact, they probably were more hurt by it. And it's a complicated reason why. And he explains it. He explains these cycles of things that happen, of cycles of war, that this one particular, he centers on this one woman. He says her name is Shakira. I don't know if that's really her name. I was actually surprised that he would give her name, but through her story, he demonstrates the cycles of things that this family went through and these people in their general vicinity went through, of these different fighting forces that came through, and the rules they imposed, and how much they shook down the citizens, and how much they fought with other people, and including the American and British troops, and the impact on them and the civilians that got killed. And the basic point he makes is that for the gains of the women in the urban areas, it was more, the price was paid by the women in the rural areas. And I guess the reason he gave for that, and Kyle, I'm not remembering exactly what the reasoning was there, but I think it was that in order to keep the Taliban out of the urban areas, so they could develop those, and they could create a lifestyle where women had real rights and could advance. They just did a lot of bombing that killed citizens too. I think that was the basic reason that he gave, but he made a good argument anyway. But the same thing, there's these cycles of war just going over and over again, and it's just a different guy oppressing these women and setting these rules out. They can't leave the house. As soon as they come of age, into puberty, they're locked in their rooms, basically locked in their homes, basically until they're a grandmother. And there's a whole, that's why I don't want to get into too many details, because I'm not going to do it justice. But that was one of the big points that he made.
Right.
I was kind of waiting for a happy ending, like, even as much as I disliked the Taliban, I was kind of waiting for but this time around, she has new hope or whatever, but it wasn't. It was a bit of a letdown. It was more like, well, nah, they're going to go back to, we've got no rights. We still have to, go back in our homes, but I think they referred to the Taliban last time around as being a little softer than the Mujahideen type guys, and the drug cartels, and the American and the British troops burst in their homes with guns pulled and things like that too. So
right.
They were not seen as saviors, that's for sure.
Right. It kind of, I almost got the impression that maybe the Taliban provided a little bit more security at the cost of some freedoms, but I mean, when you're choosing between being not very free and not very secure in either scenario, really, anyways, it's not like you have, I guess, much optimism either way. But that is, I guess, kind of the difference that they're talking about, where it's not so black and white. It's just pretty dark shades of gray for either side, and they may have like a little bit of, oh, this is a little bit better under the Taliban, or maybe this is a little bit better under the U.S. and whoever they're putting in charge. It's bleak.
It is really bleak, and she goes through these cycles with these different powers that take over her little area, and in the beginning, like, she has hope. She actually thinks things might get better, things like that. But by the several different cycles through, whatever it was, 20 plus years, like, she's not even hopeful anymore. However, one of my takeaways was um, and I think this was a point that the author was trying to make. Instead of, I don't want to put it this way because it sounds insulting to them, but I was going to say, instead of waiting for someone to save them and change everything, waiting for a savior, and I don't think they're waiting for a savior, but it basically, she had come to the conclusion, she started thinking differently. They talk about things like, a book hidden in a closet, teaching herself letters and how to read, and secretly teaching her daughter how to read and things like this. But they also mention that she comes to the realization that the laws that the Taliban put on, or any of these other people who were ruling over them, lording over them, the rules that they're imposing on the women doesn't come from the Islamic law. It's not based in any Islamic law. And she now is starting to think like, well, wait, and I think one of them I think she actually did pose this argument to,
I think
some
Anand
scholar or
Gopal
whatever.
did. I think the
Uh,
author. I think he was talking about himself when he said it, because the guy,
uh,
kind of like admitted the religious figure for Hellman kind of admitted that, like, yeah, it may not actually be Islamic. It's more
yeah.
cultural.
So they basically made this shit up, right?
Mm-hmm.
Um, but she's starting to think along those lines of kind of like forming an alliance of women and challenging them on a legal basis. And I'm like, yes, that's good, because I think that the only people who can pull themselves out of this, or going to pull themselves out of this, are the women themselves. You would hope there would be an alliance between the urban and the rural women. I mean, I certainly hope that's the way it turns out, and that they don't lose too many people to being stoned to death in the process. But I guess the other gripe I have is that in some cases, when I've had people come at me on Twitter, and I don't even remember, a few different times, saying, well, the women in the rural areas, they've got no rights, right? They have to wear these full burqas, and they're not allowed. They don't leave their homes, things like this. But this male person was telling me, but they rule the home, and like they don't really want these kind of rights, that you're just sort of pushing these rights on them. They're not the ones who want them. No, you do, and they rule in their own ways. And I'm sure there's some partial truth to that, ruling in their own ways. But the other thing that that Anand did was, he basically made it clear they do want those rights. You know what I mean? They don't want to. This wouldn't be their choice if they actually had any rights or freedom. I'm not saying they want to, like, be go-go dancers or something. I'm just saying that they are very aware of their situation, according to his research of all of these women, and they do want to do something about it.
Right. And I
So,
mean, I'm sure if you walked around rural Afghanistan enough, Joanne, you could find like a handful of women who are like, no, I want things to be exactly how they are for me, and I want that for my.
yeah,
And I'm sure that exists, and I'm sure to some extent maybe he makes a good point that. Like when the West comes in and tries to impose like our values on the Afghan women, like maybe it doesn't actually line up with exactly what they want in terms of what rights we're like advocating for. Like what the woman in the article, Shakira, what she may want may not be the same thing that whatever our NGOs are
yeah,
providing or anything like that. And I think that's like a fair point too, but I think he is generally missing the mark with what he's saying. And this article does show that this woman seemed to like feel connected enough to the other women in her community that she could get them to like kind of follow her, or be are interested in what she has to say and everything. That it isn't that like every woman in rural Afghanistan's like, no, I like the way things are and I don't want anything more than this or anything like that.
yeah, and there are going to be plenty of people who are just so traumatized by the whole thing that they don't want to take any risks. They just want
Right.
things to calm down. That's going to be
I wonder if like all the U.S.
widespread.
drone strikes and kind of how the U.S. war has gone over the past 20 years has reinforced it all, though, the oppressive culture, even like for the women, just because if it is like oppressive, maybe there's some level of security that comes out of that. And certainly if you're inflicting a wide amount of PTSD on the people of Afghanistan, like that's some kind of like perverse, like corrupted society thing that happens, is just it's gonna like become more patriarchal because of massive trauma that you've inflicted on everybody. And if the women are made conditioned to be in the home, then that's probably been reinforced, that there's a lot of fighting and airstrikes going on outside. But that's just maybe a little speculation on my part too. And
Yeah,
in no way justifies what the condition that the women live in or anything. I'm just like kind of saying that's I think in part
yeah.
trauma. Connor, anything on this?
Well, I was just gonna say that, like, to your point, I mean, from what we understand, it seems like the administration intends to continue bombing the country, and as well as, I mean, just the economic aspect of this. I mean, it's one of the poorest countries in the world. They're facing a major economic crisis. There was just the article out at antiwar.com today about how I think it was Doctors Without Borders saying that the healthcare system is on the brink of absolute collapse, and the UN is saying that food and all kinds of like basic necessities are running out very quickly. And in the meantime, it's just like on Fox News, they're ranting and raving about how oh, there aren't any women in the government. There aren't any female ministers, and it's basically done with this sort of eye toward, well, then we'll just withhold money from them, and it's going to lend itself to saying, because they keep saying you have to earn your international recognition, and for all the stuff, all the sort of liberal tears about the women's rights and everything like that. It's unfortunate. I mean, I don't know what America can really do about that. I mean, as the government, certainly, I don't think they can do anything good about it necessarily, but certainly contributing to the economic crisis and threatening to bomb the country more is only going to make the conditions that much worse. And to your point, like if you're bombing the Taliban all this time and bombing the Pashtun regions, there is, of course, whenever it doesn't matter how necessarily authoritarian a state or a security force is, if you're being attacked by some foreign occupier or some other group, there is you see it all the time with the maximum pressure sanctions campaigns. There's a rally around the flag kind of mentality, so it may end up only making those problems worse because it garners more support for the hardliners essentially. And it's tragic all the way around.
Joanne, anything else?
I just had the one other thing that I just wanted to mention. It was a video that I came across on RT, and it's short, and I wrote down the transcript for it, but I was very surprised by it, and a little confused by it in terms of what we've been hearing. So basically, it says the title of it is Afghan farmers say opium price has flourished under Taliban. They say in the description, before I tell you the transcript, they say that these opium farmers, and they cite 3 of them, were located near Jalalabad, and that the prices for the opium have just been like skyrocketing, which, I mean, you can understand why. The first guy says he says, my name is Farid Ahmed. The opium business has been around since the days of the Taliban. I assume he means the first Taliban in the 90s. He says, for the past 12 years, the Afghan government has banned the cultivation of opium. The opium factory here was closed. Since the Taliban government came to power, the factory has just been restored. Opium prices have risen again. Opium is used to make your drug powder. It's being trafficked to 2 other countries, and borders are open. Then the next guy says, my name is Muhammad Islam. I'm a resident of Sarkad, Afghanistan. For 8 or 9 years, we've been dealing with opium. Before we used to spend money on opium, I used to grow opium in the hot weather. If the crops were ready, opium would hardly sell for 10,000 rupees per kilogram. It was very hard to earn money with opium. With the advent of the new government, opium has flourished. The rate increased. I don't know yet whether the Taliban are closing or leaving it, or if the crop will not come. It has increased from 10,000 to 48,000 rupees. Opium also ran out, so the rate increased. And then the last guy says, my name is, it looks like Kyle, actually, Q-A-I-A-L. I am from the town of Sukkot. It takes 6 months to cultivate opium before we can harvest it. Opium smugglers buy it from us and sell it on. After being sold, the opium is transported to Pakistan by truck. The opium then moves to Peshawar, Karachi, India, Dubai, and other countries. We don't even know what it is used for. Its byproducts are given to our animals as fodder. So I was like, huh. The only thing that didn't surprise me was that the price is going up, because the Taliban has basically declared that they're going to shut down the opium trade. But the opium trade has been flourishing throughout the 20 years that we have been occupying Afghanistan, as far as I know. I'm not sure if is it true that the Afghan government outlawed cultivation of opium? I'm not sure if I ever even knew that.
They did, but at the same time,
it was like wink and nod, right?
there were different issues where a lot of the warlords that were on the side of the U.S., including the first president's brother, were major drug traffickers. And I think that at some point, like during, the various different counter insurgency plans, the U.S. realized that you can't really get rid of opium because it does too much damage to the local economy. That'll drive people into the hands of the Taliban. And so, I mean, they tried all different things. And my guess is that in, different areas of Afghanistan over the past 20 years, the policy's been pretty different. One of the, I guess, the more interesting things that I was thinking, I wonder if any of it has to do with maybe a lack of corruption right now, that the farmers are seeing more of their product because it doesn't have to go through so many. And not that the Taliban won't eventually be able to set up all their own checkpoints and taxes and everything like that. But just in the chaos and the floods of transition that, there may be like just less corrupt people, like, in on the chain and the take and everything like that. I often think, this may be something that happens when you have a new administration enter, that initially you just have corruption kind of take a dip because all the institutionalized people who are feeding off the system, some of them get kicked off. And, it takes a while for new people to clean back on. And so I wonder if it has anything to do with that. And then also just, maybe the Taliban worked out better deals with the Pakistanis and whatever other country it's being exported to. And, they're not paying quite the tariff on the product right now or something like that.
Yeah, and I do recall at one point, it was a really complex situation someone explained that we were bombing in one area of Afghanistan, and I think maybe even saying it was ISIS when it may not have been, but what we were really doing was advantaging one set of growers over another, so you can imagine that kind of thing may have happened too. But when he said the factory had been shut down and now it's open again, I was like, first of all, that was fast. And I mean, some of these areas have been have been taken over by the Taliban for longer periods of time. I thought Jalalabad was generally, though, I don't know how far from Jalalabad they are. Like, I thought Jalalabad was one of the last areas to go down, but, it was just pretty quick that they got their factory up and running again. And the one guy says he didn't know what they use it for. And I'm like, And then I thought maybe this may have been a pitch to the Taliban, like they may have been doing some marketing, but they did not look the least bit. they looked very sincere. Like I didn't sense any.
Yeah, the only thing I was maybe a little suspicious of is the guy that said that, he knew the product went from Pakistan to Karachi. And it's like, if you're a opium farmer in Pakistan, I mean, in Afghanistan, somebody may tell you that's where it's going, but, like, I doubt he's been along for the ride enough to, like, actually know that that's the case. But they had some interesting footage in there of how they were loading up the cars to smuggle in and everything like that. So, pretty interesting piece. I guess I want to take a minute to talk about something that's been really bothering me, and mainly the right has kind of, and this is more not the neocons essentially, but even the mainstream thoughts types have adopted this idea that Biden made some key mistakes leaving Afghanistan. Maybe these were mistakes, but certainly he would have been ripped to shred by these same people at the time if he had made these decisions. And as they say that he was wrong to remove the military before he got all the civilians out, and that the U.S. should have removed all the military equipment. Now, the main issues I have with this are, if Biden would have removed the military equipment, it would have caused the collapse of the Afghan National Army and the collapse of the government, and it would have been a big white flag, basically admitting we lost the war. And I guarantee you, almost everybody, 99% of the people who are right now saying, we should have took the weapons before we left, said, one of the things you never do as a military is concede the fight before it's over, or something stupid like that, right? And so I kind of, it's such an unfair twisting of history and like misremembering the past couple of months that I want to bring that one up. And then the second one was about like getting the people out. But again, that would have been waving the white flag essentially. If we were evacuating all of our civilians, it would have been a massive warning sign to all the Afghan officials. And I'm sure a lot of officials would have done essentially what Ghani did at the end, which is collect all the money they can and get the hell out of the country, because they see the end coming as all of their Western counterparts are leaving the country. And so in one sense, I could imagine that if you had like a real ass like president who knew what ending a war meant and what was going to happen, if Danny Sturgeon or Scott Horton was president, first day in office, they give a speech. We're getting the hell out of Afghanistan. We're doing it on May 1st. Nothing about it. We're getting all of our equipment out because the Afghan National Army actually doesn't exist. It's a fiction, and the options are the equipment's going to fall to the Taliban, or it's going to leave Afghanistan, and we're getting it out. And to any Americans, we're leaving on May 1st. That's the last date. So if you want to leave the country, you got to leave by then. And just, to have maybe laid it out like that in the very beginning. But who knows if that would have even produced a less chaotic result than what ended up happening anyway, which is, I guess, like kind of the final point that I want to make. While there are certainly things that were unacceptable about the withdrawal, and, I've talked about it with both of you, I've covered it with Will, the State Department basically having no idea what they were doing until a couple days before they start like having evacuation flights going out of the country. And it just seemed like, the U.S. government really could have prepared for the fact that the Afghan government would collapse by August 31st. Not that they had to acknowledge that that was the most likely scenario or anything, but it really didn't seem like they had any plans for it at all. And essentially, their plan was, well, if it happens, we'll accelerate all of our other plans, which isn't really planning for it to happen, and like having the evacuation procedures in place and what you're going to do, and so those are just some of my thoughts. And Joanne, I don't know if you have anything to expand on there.
Yeah, in fact I was just listening to Scott Horton and Gareth interview, and they talked about this point and gave voice to something that I've been thinking too. Like, I mean, I really don't like being sympathetic to Biden, but like, let's face it. How was that supposed to play out? And the other thing that everyone forgets is that there were talks going on all through this. They thought that they could pull off some kind of a power sharing deal, or an interim government, or something that would not require this, rapid scurrying from the country. But really, one of the things that Biden said was, he mentioned that the Afghan government asked him not to pull out all the people from the embassy, not to start taking the special visa people out, because it would just basically signal that they were done. Like I don't actually know how you do something like this unless the other party is very patient and sort of lets you work things out. And personally, I think the Taliban were stupid for doing things the way they did. They could have hung out on the outskirts of Kabul, achieved the same thing without the chaos. But I'm afraid that they, like, I'm not sure why they stepped on the gas. Why they didn't take their time a little bit
Yeah,
longer in getting to Kabul? So I really wonder if the American media, all these last ditch, pleas for not pulling out, like every weekend at least, there was another war hawk out there saying, don't do it, or, do this or whatever. Or maybe they had some intelligence or something like that, that they were considering another surge and, reversing choice. I don't understand why they stepped on the gas when they weren't ready to take over.
I guess I think there's like kind of two possibilities, Joanne. And the first is that the Taliban just maybe as a bad strategic move, maybe I don't know, just stepped on the gas and really tried to take over. And I saw this statement today, I think Connor sent it to me, from the former president of Afghanistan, Ashraf Ghani, and he basically says that he decided to leave Kabul because there was threats of bloodshed and this was the way to avert it. I tend to be skeptical of what he's saying. I think he made out of Afghanistan like a bandit with a boatload of money and, basically just stole from the people. There's another narrative, which is basically when the Taliban surrounded Kabul, the government fled, including, the president. And this is kind of the sense that I got from reading the Twitter thread from the head of Afghanistan's central bank, where people started leaving. And so then, other ministers started leaving, and then their deputies started leaving. And then there's at least a report in the Washington Post that the Taliban actually offered to let the Americans secure Kabul until they withdraw, and the Americans just didn't have the forces for it, which I think is accurate. I mean, it's a massive city. There's like, what, 4, 5, 6 million people that live in Kabul?
6 million.
I think that's what Ghani said. I've only seen it up to like 5 before, and some estimates put 4, so I wonder if he's exaggerating a little bit. But whatever it is, I mean, you're talking like tens, if not 100,000
There were people pouring
troops
in every day. There was more people fleeing into.
Right.
So there very well could have been 6 or more.
And not that there was like widespread looting going on in Kabul before the Taliban entered, but I can't imagine a situation where there's no security force for a couple days and all these Western buildings are starting to empty out and people start looting, and that just leaves a mess. Not that I'm saying that the Taliban did the right thing by going in, but this is a situation that we're talking about in 2020, or 2021, where there's really no right decisions to be made by a lot of people in Afghanistan. It's really only bad decisions. And the fact that the Taliban have taken over the country, and it was a relatively bloodless takeover, not that was bloodless, but by scale of taking over that much territory as quickly as they did, it wasn't that ugly. There was no fighting between the U.S. and the Taliban at all, as far as we could tell so far. And that's really something to say after a 20-year war. Connor, anything on this before we wrap up?
Yeah, well, I was just going to say that I think part of it also was for months they were talking about building up that embassy command, and they were going to be running an advise and assist mission and counterterrorism, and they were going to continue to fund the ANA, and it was going to be this. It seems like what they wanted was some sort of long-term or maybe even just for a few years a proxy war that they could pour billions of dollars into every year and have them kind of beat the hell out of each other. And then I don't know, I guess they hope that Kabul would that Ghani's government would last, but it doesn't seem like it just seems like I think they had plans to essentially stay, like you're saying, and then it got to the point where it just became impractical. And so, and also if the Taliban hadn't come in right away, maybe there would have been some sort of chaos. If who knows what the group that they just supposedly conquered in Panjshir. There's differing reports over it, but who knows what those groups would have been able to set up in Kabul for them. So maybe they wouldn't have been able to just walk in. The whole thing just seems. I don't know. I think that they slow walked the whole thing because nobody really thought they were going to leave. And then eventually they did. And the weirdest thing, too, is the last two big massacres out of this whole thing. It's looking more and more, and Kyle and Will have covered on the show that the vast majority of the casualties is very possible at that attack outside the airport. Were basically U.S. soldiers firing on the crowds in a panic, and their allied soldiers and some of the militiamen they had in the towers, some of the groups the CIA was working with, and in addition to the drone strike on the family in Kabul. So it's just like I have no idea what they were thinking, but it just seems like. It's good that we're out, but yeah, it couldn't have been worse. But it's also interesting that the people who want to attack Biden for, for not getting enough people out, they can't. Some of those mainstream right-wing types can't seem to decide if they're going to attack him for that and use that as a weapon against him politically, or complain about the refugees and what a threat they are to us here at home. It's sort of. It's just, the whole thing has just been very unfortunate, but I just see a lot of the political attacks on Biden as a way of, they're just really clearly trying to manage the narrative and obfuscate the real issue, which is that we just spent, 20 years, $2 trillion and killed hundreds of thousands of people, turned this place into a disaster zone. Not that it wasn't like that before, but certainly we made it a lot worse. And now, I don't know. Hopefully it gets better. But like I said, I can't figure out yet exactly how the U.S. is going to deal with the Taliban going forward. Of course, that remains to be seen.
All right, Connor, Joanne, thank you both so much for doing this, and we'll have to do another one of these again sometime. Maybe try to do one once a month or something with the three of us, doing a panel show like this. It was absolutely great. Joanne is again the host of Around the Empire. Joanne, what's the Twitter handles for everything?
Everything's Around the Empire, at Around the Empire, aroundtheempire.com.
And then Patreon and Rockfin for the bonus content.
Yeah, patreon.com/aroundtheempire, rockfin.com/aroundtheempire. I got a Telegram channel now too. I think it's t.me/aroundtheempire.
All right, and then
anybody can join that.
Connor is at the Institute, the Great Libertarian Institute, so any featured articles he writes appear there, and he is at Freeman's Mind 96 on Twitter.
Perfect.
All right, and
thank you both again.
Last thing to mention, for anybody still listening, this weekend, end the damn war rallies across the country on 9/11. I'm speaking in Denver. Connor, you're going out to your local rally. If you want to say where that is, go ahead.
Yeah, I'll be at the one in Scottsdale.
All right, so check that out.
Anybody there?
And I don't know, Joanne, maybe you'll
I'm
post
still
on
deciding.
Twitter if you end up going and where you're going.
I might go to DC. I might go to Philadelphia. Not sure yet.
All right. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.